A single royal guard stood at attention during Queen Elizabeth's memorial service, unaware that in just 20 minutes his entire life would change forever. Corporal Alaric Bell had served the crown faithfully for years, but when Queen Camilla's eyes met his across St. George's Chapel, something shifted. The palace bulletin would later state he was relieved of ceremonial duty pending protocol clarification, but no formal charges were ever filed. What had Bell done to earn such swift, silent removal? The answer would eventually shake the monarchy to its core. If you're as intrigued by this moment as we were, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more royal stories, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Bell's transformation from civilian to guardian began decades earlier in the rigorous training grounds of the British Army. 34 years of service had shaped him from a 19-year-old recruit with calloused hands and dreams of serving his country into one of the most trusted protectors in the royal household. Military instructors stripped away every trace of civilian softness and rebuilt him into something harder, more reliable. The young man from a cramped Birmingham flat learned to march in perfect formation, to hold his rifle steady in driving rain, and to follow orders without question. Afghanistan changed Bell in ways that civilian life never could. 2 tours of duty taught him to read danger in the shift of shadows, to trust his instincts when something felt wrong, and to protect his brothers in arms with his own life if necessary. The desert heat prepared him for long hours of motionless duty, while constant threat sharpened his awareness to razor precision. His commanding officers noted his steady nerves under fire and unwavering loyalty to the mission. The transition from battlefield to palace required different training entirely. Bell spent months memorizing the faces of approved personnel and mastering the art of becoming invisible while remaining completely alert. At St. George's Chapel, he discovered that guarding royalty meant recognizing subtle signs of diplomatic tension and understanding that his silence was as valuable as his vigilance. His daily routine became a ritual of precision. Bell arrived 30 minutes early each morning, inspecting his uniform until every button gleamed. He knew the position of every camera, every entrance, and every security concern within the ancient stone walls. His fellow guards respected his thoroughness and steadiness during high-pressure ceremonies. The unspoken rules of royal protection governed every aspect of Bell's professional life. Guards witnessed private conversations and family disputes that the public would never see, yet they were expected to carry these secrets without acknowledgement. Bell understood his role required becoming human furniture, present but unnoticed, protective but never intrusive. He watched marriages, funerals, and state ceremonies from mere feet away, absorbing history while remaining emotionally detached. The military discipline Bell had cultivated served him well in this environment of absolute discretion. His training taught him to compartmentalize information, follow orders without debate, and trust the chain of command even when circumstances seemed unclear. This conditioning would later create an impossible choice between the loyalty he had been trained to show and the moral clarity his conscience demanded. Bell's modest background made his position meaningful. The son of a factory worker and school secretary, he had never imagined standing guard over ceremonies that shaped British history. His parents taught him the value of honest work and unwavering integrity, lessons that translated perfectly into royal service where trust was everything and second chances were rare. The medals in his small Aldershot flat represented courage under fire, but royal service demanded different bravery, the strength to remain loyal even when loyalty meant accepting situations he might not understand. The grandeur of his surroundings never diminished his sense of duty or appreciation for the honor of his position. On the morning of Queen Elizabeth's memorial service, Bell prepared with the same meticulous care that had marked every day of his royal service. He had no reason to expect this ceremony would differ from hundreds of others he had overseen with flawless professionalism. His record remained spotless, his reputation unquestioned, and his future seemingly secure. The ancient chapel waited in solemn readiness as mourners began gathering for a service that would honor the late Queen's memory while formally acknowledging her successor's reign. Bell took his position with the quiet confidence of a man who had never failed in his duty, unaware that the very training that made him an exemplary guard would soon force him to choose between silence and truth. The memorial service proceeded with the solemnity befitting a fallen monarch. Hundreds of mourners filled St. George's Chapel, their black attire creating a sea of grief against the ancient stone walls. Bell maintained his position near the north transept, his trained eyes scanning the congregation while his body remained perfectly still. The familiar weight of his ceremonial sword and the press of his collar reminded him of the honor he carried in protecting this sacred moment. Archbishop Welby's voice echoed through the vaulted ceiling as he spoke of Queen Elizabeth's decades of faithful service, each word measured and reverent. Queen Camilla sat in the front row, her black hat adorned with a small veil that partially obscured her features. Bell had observed her at dozens of ceremonies over the years, noting her composed demeanor and careful attention to protocol. She rarely acknowledged the guards directly, understanding that their protection required them to remain invisible fixtures in the royal landscape. Today seemed no different as she listened to the service with the same dignified stillness expected of all senior royals. The moment that would change everything came during the second hymn. Bell felt eyes upon him with the intensity that his military training had taught him to recognize. He shifted his gaze slightly and found Queen Camilla staring directly at him across the chapel. Her expression was unreadable behind the dark fabric of her veil, but her attention was unmistakably focused on his position. The contact lasted perhaps 3 seconds before she turned back toward the altar, leaving Bell wondering if he had imagined the exchange or misunderstood its significance. According to the account that would later emerge, what happened next unfolded with swift precision. Queen Camilla made a discreet signal to palace security, indicating Bell's position with subtle gestures that only trained personnel would recognize. Within minutes, Bell noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Chief Inspector Reynolds approached from the side aisle, moving with the careful discretion that characterized all palace security operations. His face revealed nothing as he positioned himself just behind Bell's left shoulder. "Corporal Bell, you're to come with me immediately. Quiet transition, no disruption to the service." Bell's training kicked in automatically. He remained motionless for several heartbeats, then executed a perfect about-face and followed Reynolds toward a side exit he had memorized during his security briefings. His mind raced through possible explanations for the unusual mid-ceremony removal. The questions multiplied as they walked through corridors he knew by heart toward an uncertain destination. The conversation that followed took place in a small administrative office that Bell had never entered before. Reynolds closed the door and turned to face him with an expression of professional regret. The words came in clipped official language that revealed nothing while explaining everything. Bell was being relieved of ceremonial duty pending protocol clarification. No specific incident was mentioned. No timeline was provided for his return. His security clearance would be reviewed, his access to royal venues suspended, and his future service status remained unclear. Bell's hands trembled slightly as he processed the reality of his situation. 34 years of flawless service had ended with a glance and a whispered dismissal. He asked the questions that any professional would ask. What had he done wrong? Who had made the complaint? What specific protocol violation was being investigated? Reynolds repeated the same phrase with mechanical precision. Protocol clarification, pending review, no further information available. The escort from the palace grounds felt like a walk through a nightmare. Bell's fellow guards watched from their positions as he was led past them toward the exit. Their faces revealed the horror of professionals witnessing the sudden fall of a respected colleague. Each step reminded Bell of his military background, where careers could end instantly and without warning. But this felt different. Palace sources later framed the removal as a precaution following reports of threatening behavior and inappropriate comments from a member of the guard detail. The carefully neutral language of the official statement spoke of routine personnel adjustments and protocol clarifications, masking the explosive accusation that would soon consume Bell's life. Bell returned to his modest flat carrying questions that would consume him for weeks. His silence in those crucial first hours would prove to be a tactical error as forces beyond his control began shaping a narrative that would destroy everything he had built. The first headline appeared in tabloids such as The Daily Express 3 days after Bell's removal from duty. Royal Guard removed after threatening behavior ran across the front page in bold letters that transformed speculation into apparent fact. Bell stared at the newspaper stand outside his local shop, reading his professional death sentence in black and white. The article cited unnamed palace sources who described a guard who had made inappropriate comments about senior royals and displayed concerning behavior during official duties. His name wasn't mentioned, but colleagues would recognize the details immediately. Anonymous palace briefings shaped the headlines with devastating consistency. These unnamed sources painted a picture of Queen Camilla's sharp eye for security threats and her quick action to protect the monarchy. They described a vigilant queen who had noticed subtle signs of instability that others had missed. Bell's military background, once a source of pride, became evidence of potential trauma and unpredictable behavior. His quiet demeanor was reframed as brooding resentment. His dedication to duty transformed into obsessive fixation. Television reports followed the same narrative arc. Royal experts appeared on morning shows to discuss the challenges of vetting palace staff and the importance of removing threats before they escalated. Bell watched these segments from his small kitchen table, seeing his decades of service reduced to cautionary tales about inadequate background checks. The experts spoke with authority about incidents they had never witnessed and motivations they couldn't possibly understand. The manufactured evidence accumulated through strategic leaks and careful timing. Stories emerged about Bell's supposedly erratic behavior during recent ceremonies, his failure to follow direct orders, and his inappropriate comments about royal family members. None of these incidents had actually occurred, but the details were specific enough to sound credible and vague enough to avoid verification. Former colleagues began to remember moments that had never happened, their memories shaped by the constant repetition of these fictional narratives. Bell's silence allowed this anonymous narrative to solidify into accepted truth. His professional isolation deepened as guards he had worked alongside for years stopped returning his phone calls. Officers who had once praised his performance now treated him as a potential security risk whose very presence could contaminate their own careers. The regimental association meetings he had attended for years became uncomfortable gatherings where conversations stopped when he approached. The psychological toll manifested in ways Bell had never experienced during his military service. Combat stress had been manageable because enemies were identifiable and missions had clear objectives. This assault on his character came from shadows, delivered through anonymous sources and unnamed officials who could destroy his reputation without ever facing him directly. Sleep became elusive as he replayed conversations and interactions, searching for moments that might have been misinterpreted or weaponized against him. His savings dwindled as potential employers discovered his connection to the palace scandal. Private security firms that might have welcomed his experience now saw him as a liability. The very skills that had made him valuable as a royal guard became evidence of his potential danger as a civilian. Job interviews ended abruptly when his name appeared in background checks, alongside headlines about threatening behavior and removal from royal duties. Bell's breaking point arrived on a gray Tuesday morning when he found photographers outside his flat. The tabloids had finally published his name and photograph, completing his transformation from anonymous threat to public menace. Neighbors who had known him for years now avoided eye contact. His elderly landlord mentioned concerns from other tenants about having someone with his background in the building. The careful life he had built around duty and service was collapsing under the weight of manufactured scandal. The realization that silence had become complicity struck him with sudden clarity. His loyalty to the crown had protected the very people who were destroying him. His adherence to protocol had prevented him from defending himself against accusations that grew more elaborate with each retelling. The palace's weapon wasn't just the lies they spread about him, but his own unwillingness to break the codes of conduct that had once defined his honor. Bell understood that his choice was no longer between loyalty and betrayal, but between self-preservation and complete destruction. The time for quiet dignity had passed. But as he sat in his darkening flat, surrounded by the wreckage of his reputation, Bell remembered something from decades earlier that might change everything. The mistake that would change everything happened on a humid July morning in 1997, when 30-year-old Alaric Bell was handling routine correspondence at Kensington Palace. The nervous courier who appeared at the service entrance carried himself with obvious distress, his hands shaking as he produced an envelope bearing an unusual palace seal. After stammering something about urgent delivery, he disappeared with visible relief, leaving Bell to examine what he assumed was standard protocol documentation. When Bell opened the envelope, his eyes fell upon handwriting that would haunt him for the next 26 years. He immediately recognized Princess Diana's distinctive script, but the usually elegant writing appeared hurried and desperate. The letter began with words that revealed its explosive nature, describing a confrontation that had shaken the princess to her core. Bell found himself reading details about palace intrigue that transformed his understanding of the world he served. Diana's words described a chilling encounter with Camilla Parker Bowles that had occurred just days before the letter was written on July 15th. The princess detailed specific threats about what would happen to people who interfered with certain relationships, and warnings about how inconvenient obstacles had a way of disappearing from the picture. Bell's military experience had exposed him to dangerous situations, but nothing had prepared him for reading about threats within the royal family itself. The most disturbing passage appeared near the end of the letter, where Diana wrote with obvious fear about her growing certainty that some people would stop at nothing to clear their path to power. She mentioned accidents that weren't accidents and disappearances that weren't voluntary, language that suggested she understood the mortal danger of her position. The haunting line that would echo in Bell's mind for decades followed. "If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident." His training dictated immediate destruction of any misdirected correspondence, but Bell's conscience wrestled with the gravity of what he held. He recognized the handwriting as Diana's and could not destroy a note that described threats to someone's life. The letter represented more than royal gossip or family drama. It documented threats against someone whose safety was part of his sworn duty. The weight of decision pressed down on him as he considered the consequences of either choice. Bell's decision to preserve the letter came from instincts honed during military service, where intelligence that could save lives was never discarded lightly. He sealed the pages in a waterproof envelope and secured them in a place where they would remain undisturbed for decades. This choice transformed him from an ordinary guard into an unwitting keeper of royal secrets, a burden that would grow heavier with each passing year. The years that followed brought Bell no relief from the knowledge he carried. He watched Diana's public struggles while knowing the private fears she had documented, witnessed Camilla's gradual integration into royal life while remembering her alleged threats, and observed the careful management of public perception that surrounded the entire situation. His silence became both protection and prison, a secret that isolated him from colleagues who had no idea what he knew. Diana's death in 1997, just months after writing the letter, gave her words a prophetic weight that haunted Bell's every quiet moment. The official explanations never satisfied his military-trained skepticism, but his position demanded silence even as his conscience demanded action. For 26 years, he carried the burden of Diana's final warning, watching as the very people she had feared consolidated their power and influence. Now, facing the destruction of his own career through false accusations, Bell finally understood the true purpose of that long-ago mistake. The letter that had been meant for other eyes had found its way to the one person who would preserve it through decades of silence. His choice was no longer between loyalty and betrayal, but between allowing Diana's voice to remain buried forever or giving her the justice she had never received in life. The decision that would define the remainder of his existence crystallized with sudden clarity. Bell reached for his phone, knowing that his next call would set in motion events that neither he nor the monarchy could control. The walk to Westminster felt like marching toward his own execution. Bell's solicitor had arranged the parliamentary hearing as a last desperate attempt to clear his name. But the odds against him seemed impossible. Committee members had already heard weeks of testimony supporting the palace's version of events. His claims about hidden letters and royal conspiracies would sound like the desperate fantasies of a disgraced guard trying to salvage his reputation. The envelope in his jacket pocket felt heavier with each step, 26 years of silence finally demanding to be broken. The committee room buzzed with activity that stopped the moment Bell entered. Cameras lined the walls like firing squad rifles, their lenses tracking his movement toward the witness table. Journalists filled every available seat, their notebooks ready to capture what most expected to be either complete vindication or spectacular self-destruction. The committee chairman opened the session with formal politeness that barely concealed his doubt about the proceedings. Bell's accusations had shocked Westminster when his solicitor first presented them, but shocking claims required extraordinary evidence. Committee members studied Bell with the careful attention of people preparing to judge not just his testimony, but his sanity. Their faces revealed the weight of their position, knowing that millions of viewers would scrutinize their handling of allegations against the monarchy itself. Bell's hands trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket to retrieve the envelope that had waited decades for this moment. The waterproof seal he had applied in 1997 remained intact, its edges yellowed with age but still secure. He placed it on the table before him, his military training fighting against the nerves that threatened to overwhelm his composure. The moment Bell broke the seal, the atmosphere in the room shifted. His fingers moved carefully as he extracted pages that had remained hidden since Princess Diana wrote them in desperation and fear. The handwriting was immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with royal correspondence, but Bell knew that recognition alone wouldn't be enough. He would have to read Diana's most private fears aloud to a room full of strangers, giving voice to warnings that had been silenced for over 2 decades. His voice remained steady as he began reading Diana's account of the confrontation that had terrified her. The princess described threats that went beyond normal family disputes, warnings about what happened to people who stood in certain paths to power. Bell's military bearings served him well as he delivered each devastating sentence with the precision of a trained soldier reporting critical intelligence. Committee members leaned forward in their chairs, their initial skepticism beginning to crack as Diana's words filled the chamber. When Bell reached the passage describing threatened accidents, several committee members visibly paled. The weight of those words settled over the room as he continued with mechanical precision, knowing that hesitation would invite doubt about his credibility. Then came the moment that would define everything that followed. Bell's voice carried clearly across the silent chamber as he read Diana's most chilling prediction. "If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident." The silence that followed was complete and terrible. Committee members sat motionless as they processed the implications of what they were hearing. Bell's obvious sincerity had shifted their perception of both him and his explosive testimony. His military record spoke to his reliability under pressure, while his years of faithful royal service contradicted any suggestion of instability or deception. The careful way he handled Diana's letter demonstrated respect for its significance, not the behavior of someone fabricating evidence for personal gain. When Bell finally completed his reading and offered the letter for forensic examination, the chamber remained suspended in stunned silence. He had given Diana the voice that death had stolen from her, allowing her fears and warnings to reach the public ear at last. The envelope that had accidentally found its way to him in 1997 had finally fulfilled its purpose, transforming a routine parliamentary hearing into a moment that would demand answers from the highest levels of power. What happened next would depend entirely on whether Diana's handwriting could survive the most rigorous scientific scrutiny available. Scotland Yard handwriting experts and paper analysis confirmed the note matched Diana's handwriting and period materials used at Kensington Palace during 1997. The forensic results spread through Westminster like wildfire, reaching journalists who had covered the royal family for decades. Within hours, Bell's testimony transformed from the desperate claims of a disgraced guard into documented evidence of threats against the late princess. Committee members who had listened with skepticism now faced the reality that they had witnessed history being rewritten in real time. Margaret Annesley had cleaned palace corridors for 15 years, her quiet efficiency making her nearly invisible to the powerful people whose private moments she inadvertently witnessed. Bell's courage in breaking his silence gave her permission to speak about a night in 1997 that had haunted her for decades. She appeared before the committee 3 days after Bell's testimony, her weathered hands gripping the witness table as she prepared to reveal what she had overheard during her late shift at Kensington Palace. Annesley's account detailed a conversation she had witnessed while cleaning offices near the private quarters. She identified Camilla's distinctive voice speaking about tragic princesses who forgot their place and living queens who remembered theirs. The housekeeper described Diana's visible fear during encounters that followed, painting a picture of escalating tension that matched the desperation evident in the preserved letter. The domino effect that followed these revelations overwhelmed the palace's ability to control the narrative. Other staff members began coming forward with their own fragments of disturbing memories and overheard conversations. A former security officer recalled unusual meetings and strange requests for personnel files. Kitchen staff remembered mysterious visitors who arrived through service entrances and left without signing guest logs. Each witness added another piece to a puzzle that revealed a pattern of secretive planning that extended far beyond normal royal business. The Metropolitan Police reopened the investigation and formed a special task force to examine new evidence. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Morrison announced that modern investigative techniques would be applied to examine the new evidence with unprecedented thoroughness. The decision represented an unprecedented challenge to the established conclusion that Diana's death had been a tragic accident caused by paparazzi pursuit and driver error. International media descended on London with the intensity reserved for royal weddings and state funerals. Headlines across 6 continents proclaimed the discovery of Diana's final warning about her own fate, transforming the princess from tragic victim into prophetic witness to her own murder. Television networks interrupted regular programming to broadcast live updates about each new development in what commentators began calling the most significant royal scandal in British history. Public opinion shifted rapidly, prompting protests, distancing by some allies, and calls in Parliament to investigate. Queen Camilla's initial response came through carefully worded palace statements that dismissed the allegations as misunderstandings and fabrications. But as more witnesses emerged and evidence accumulated, her denials began to sound increasingly desperate. Longtime supporters who had defended her through previous controversies now found themselves questioning their positions as documented evidence mounted. Streets that had once been filled with mourners now hosted protesters demanding justice for Diana and accountability for those who had silenced her. The princess's interviews about feeling hunted and threatened took on new meaning when viewed alongside the evidence that Bell had preserved. Diana's supposed paranoia about palace conspiracies was reframed as justified fear for her life. Bell emerged from his ordeal with his reputation restored and his courage recognized by a grateful nation that finally understood the price of his silence. The man who had been branded a security threat was now hailed as a guardian of truth who had preserved the most important evidence in royal history. His transformation from pariah to hero was complete, but the weight of what he had unleashed would follow him long after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines moved on to other stories. The train back to Aldershot carried Bell through countryside that looked exactly as it had weeks earlier. But everything felt different now. His small flat waited for him with the same modest furniture and faded curtains. Yet he returned as a changed man, carrying the weight of having altered British history. The postman delivered dozens of letters from veterans across the country, men and women who understood the impossible choice between loyalty and truth that Bell had faced. Their words spoke of pride in a fellow soldier who had found the courage to do what duty demanded, even when that duty meant breaking ranks with the institution he had served. Bell sat at his kitchen table each morning reading these letters while watching news reports about the constitutional crisis his testimony had triggered. Parliament debated questions that had never been asked in 1,000 years of British monarchy. Members rose to demand investigations into royal accountability and the fitness of Queen Camilla to wear the crown. Constitutional experts appeared on television to discuss scenarios that had existed only in theoretical discussions until Bell's revelation made them urgent practical concerns. The transformation from silent servant to reluctant whistleblower had cost Bell everything he thought he valued about himself. His military identity had been built around following orders without question, protecting superiors without regard for personal cost, and maintaining loyalty even under extreme pressure. Those qualities had served him well in Afghanistan and made him valuable as a royal guard, but they had also made him vulnerable to manipulation by the very people he was sworn to protect. Learning that his greatest strength could become his greatest weakness had forced Bell to reconsider everything he believed about service and honor. Other former staff came forward with corroborating fragments, inspired by Bell's courage to share their own disturbing memories and buried secrets. Each new witness added layers to a picture of systematic deception that reached into every corner of royal operations, proving that Bell's experience was part of a much larger pattern of cover-ups and intimidation. Bell found quiet satisfaction not from destroying reputations or toppling institutions, but from knowing he had finally kept the promise he made to himself in 1997 when he chose to preserve Diana's letter. Her voice had been silenced by death, but her warnings had survived to reach the public ear when they were needed most. The princess, who had been dismissed as paranoid and unstable, was revealed as someone who had understood the danger surrounding her with terrifying clarity. Bell had given her the justice that death had denied, allowing her final message to serve its intended purpose of protecting others who might face similar threats. The public's relationship with the monarchy had changed forever because of the truth Bell carried back from his ordeal. Citizens who had accepted royal infallibility as natural law now demanded transparency and accountability from the institution they supported with their taxes and loyalty. Bell found peace in understanding that his journey from ordinary guard to extraordinary truth-teller had taught him the most important lesson of his military career. The highest form of service was not blind obedience to authority, but the courage to speak truth to power when lives were at stake. His decades of faithful silence had protected the wrong people, but his decision to break that silence had honored the right principles. The modest flat in Aldershot felt like home again, because Bell finally understood what home meant for someone who had chosen conscience over comfort and truth over safety. His transformation from disgraced guard to defender of truth had revealed something profound about the nature of loyalty itself. Sometimes protecting an institution meant exposing its failures, and sometimes serving the crown required challenging those who wore it. The events described in this account represent a dramatization inspired by the provided background material. Bell's transformation from silent guardian to reluctant truth-teller illustrates the complex moral terrain that public servants must navigate when institutional loyalty conflicts with personal conscience. His decision to preserve Diana's letter for 26 years before revealing its contents triggered public outrage, protests, parliamentary debate, and a formal investigation that challenged the monarchy's traditional immunity from scrutiny. The parliamentary hearing that followed Bell's testimony demonstrated how one person's courage to break silence can reshape national conversations about power and accountability. Diana's warning about accidents that weren't accidents finally reached the public through the voice of a guard who understood that some truths are too important to remain buried. Was Bell right to wait decades before speaking, or should he have revealed Diana's letter immediately? Tell us in the comments below. Sometimes the greatest act of service is choosing truth over silence.